Welcome to Strange But True. Take a breath, slow down, and listen carefully. Some stories are documented, some are debated, some refuse to be explained. We tell you the stories, you decide what's true. Now, let's begin our journey. Most people assume time has always worked the way it does now. Hours, minutes, time zones, standard clocks. It feels ancient, it feels natural, it feels inevitable. But it isn't. For most of human history, there was no single system of timekeeping that applied across regions. There was no agreement on when a day truly began. There was no universal now. Time was local. Time was inconsistent. Time was personal. Every town kept its own noon. When the sun reached its highest point in the sky, it was midday. That was it. That was the rule. If you traveled even a short distance east or west, noon happened at a slightly different moment. Church bells marked time differently in every settlement. Mechanical clocks, when they appeared, were adjusted by local observation. For centuries, this worked, because nothing depended on synchronized minutes. That began to change in the 19th century, not because governments demanded it, not because people voted for it, not because anyone announced it, but because machines started moving faster than the sun. Railroads did not care about local noon. Telegraphs did not wait for church bells. Factories did not pause for solar alignment. Suddenly, coordination mattered more than tradition, and the old way of measuring time began to fail. In the early 1800s, rail networks expanded rapidly across Europe and North America. Trains began crossing dozens of towns in a single day. Each of those towns had its own clock. That created a problem no one had planned for. Train schedules became impossible to standardize. Passengers missed connections because their watches were correct only where they stood. Collisions occurred because engineers were following different time references. There was no single authority controlling the chaos. There was only a growing realization: local time was no longer functional. In Britain, the solution emerged quietly. Railway companies began using a single internal time reference, Greenwich Mean Time, not because it was law, not because Parliament required it, but because it worked. By the 1840s, most British railway stations had switched their clocks to Greenwich time. Local clocks remained, but they were increasingly ignored. Then something unusual happened. People began setting their personal watches to railway time. Shops adjusted their hours, courts aligned their schedules. Without a public vote, without a national announcement, a new time system started replacing the old one. By 1880, Britain made Greenwich Mean Time the official legal time. But by then, the decision was almost symbolic. The public had already adapted. The system had already taken over. The same pattern repeated elsewhere. In the United States, the problem was worse. There were more than 300 different local time standards in use during the 1800s. Railway companies created their own zones. Each company defined its own internal schedule. Maps of railroad time zones existed that did not match political boundaries. Cities sometimes operated on two different times at once: local solar time and railroad time. No law resolved the confusion, so the railroads did. One date appears again and again in institutional records: November the 18th, 1883. Railroad companies later referred to it as the Day of Two Noons. On that day, American and Canadian railroads implemented a new time system: 4 standardized time zones, 1 synchronized schedule. At exactly noon, thousands of clocks across North America were reset. Some were moved forward, some were moved backward. No legislation authorized it, no election approved it. It simply happened, and people adjusted. Businesses aligned their hours. Courts followed the new schedule. Schools adopted it. Within a year, over 85% of cities were using the railroad time system. The government did not legalize US Standard Time until 1918. But by then, the system had already won. Time had been quietly reorganized, not by a law, not by a decree, but by infrastructure. And once it was in place, no one seriously tried to undo it. The world was now running on a system almost no one remembered agreeing to. And that system would soon become global. In 1884, representatives from 25 nations met in Washington, D.C. It was called the International Meridian Conference. The question was simple: where does the world's time begin? The answer would reshape daily life everywhere. Greenwich was chosen as the prime meridian, not because it was spiritually significant, not because it was geographically central, but because British navigation charts were already widely used. Once again, convenience decided something fundamental. The conference recommended a worldwide system of time zones, but it did not enforce one. Each nation adopted the system at its own pace. Some resisted, some delayed, some modified it, but eventually, almost all of them aligned. By the early 20th century, most of the world was operating on standardized time. The sun no longer decided noon. The clock did, and almost no one noticed when the change became permanent. The shift to standardized time did not come with protests. It did not come with slogans. It did not come with resistance movements. It came with clocks being quietly reset and with habits slowly changing. In many places, people continued using local solar time privately while using standard time publicly. For a while, both systems existed side by side, but one of them was compatible with trains, factories, and global coordination. The other was not. Over time, the old system faded, not because it was wrong, but because it was inefficient. By the early 1900s, standardized time had become embedded into nearly every major institution. Banking, shipping, education, industry, military operations. Legal deadlines were defined by it. Work shifts were organized around it. Broadcast schedules depended on it. Eventually, even religious observances adjusted to it. The sun lost its authority, not formally, not symbolically, but practically. Time was no longer something people observed. It was something people obeyed. The system kept evolving. In the mid-20th century, atomic clocks were developed. They measured time based on the vibration of cesium atoms. These clocks were far more precise than any mechanical or astronomical method. Once again, a new standard replaced an old one. Not through public debate, not through mass consent, but through technical necessity. In 1967, the second was officially redefined using atomic time. Earth's rotation, the original basis of time, was no longer the reference. The planet itself was now considered too unreliable. Leap seconds were introduced to reconcile atomic time with Earth's slowing rotation. Even time itself had become something that needed correction. Today, global positioning systems rely on atomic clocks. Financial markets timestamp transactions to fractions of a second. Computer networks synchronize servers across continents. All of it depends on a system that began as a railroad workaround. a private solution to a scheduling problem. And most people never think about it. They wake up to alarms, they check calendars, they schedule meetings, they count deadlines, all inside a framework no one alive today ever voted on. There's no founding document for modern timekeeping. There's only a trail of incremental decisions made by railway companies, made by conference delegates, made by engineers, made by scientists. Each change solved a practical problem, and each one quietly replaced something older, until the entire world was running on a system that feels ancient, but is not. This system shapes sleep, it shapes labor, it shapes airline schedules, it shapes financial market timing, it shapes global coordination, and yet it exists mostly in the background, unquestioned, unexamined, embedded into daily systems. It did not arrive as a revolution. It arrived as a convenience, and once it was everywhere, it stopped being visible. History records the conferences, the inventions, the legislative formalizations, but it does not record a public moment of agreement. There's no single day when humanity chose standardized time. There's only a long sequence of quiet replacements. Local noon became obsolete. Solar time became ceremonial. The clock became the authority, and the system became permanent. Not because anyone demanded it, but because no one stopped it. History has a way of hiding the truth inside what it chooses not to explain. Inside tales, inside myths, inside legends, inside things that feel just a little off. If this story held your attention, subscribe to Strange But True, because sometimes what sounds unbelievable is exactly where the truth hides.